Welcome to We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only show dedicated to the process and strategies for transforming apartment buildings to thriving communities. I am your host, John Brackett, and welcome to the show. All right, folks, welcome to We Build Great Apartment Communities. I am your host, John Brackett. I have another amazing guest. His name is Jared Williams. So Jared, I know this is going to be a very interesting topic because anytime I'm working with people or having conversations with people and they're going outside of the box and they're really, really passionate about something, I am always very intrigued. And so fortunately, Jared is here so we can learn a little bit more about the niche and, of course, the passion that he's pursuing, that he's built himself into. So I'm going to introduce Jared. So Jared is on a mission. Jared Williams, rather, is on a mission to revolutionize Christian personal finance and is passionate about teaching Christian families a biblical and better approach to investing and managing finances. Jared has dedicated his career to shedding light on the fact that most families are invested in companies that support and even profit from unbiblical practices such as abortion, pornography, and addictions, right? He wants families to know they have alternatives. So after discovering that most families are losing over half of their wealth potential to hidden but definite losses, he was convinced that there had to be a better way to prepare for retirement and build wealth. Though his business, Biblical Wealth Solutions, and as a host of the Biblical Wealth podcast, Jared and his team help families find alternatives to relying on the stock market roller coaster, investments that can not only perform better, but can also actively improve the lives of others. So, hey, bud, welcome to the show. This is kind of fascinating to me, right? Because just how specific you've gotten about who you're trying to serve and why. And, there are many things that I love about this country, right? USA. Many things that I love about this country. One of the things that I love most is the fact that we can have this dialogue, right, without people going crazy and trying to kill each other over something like this, right? So I'm super excited to have you here so that we can have this conversation, learn a little bit more about what you do, how you do it, and just dive into this. So, man, please share with me how in the world did this come about for you, right? Where you're trying to mix wealth with biblical principles, right? Or teaching wealth, rather, or advising people on wealth, and you're mixing that with biblical principles. So when I first saw this, by the way, it just caught my eye because, just very, very, it's just unique. Okay, it's just very, very unique, and not to mention can be very controversial as well, right? I mean, if we're just being completely honest. So. I appreciate you being here, man. I appreciate you being here. So let's talk a little bit about this. How did this kind of evolve, man?
Yeah, John, thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited to get to talk.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you.
Share the story. It's been an evolution for sure. How I've gotten to where we are today. So I won't give the long version of the story. But I had been in financial services. I'd done some, life insurance and home and auto insurance and things like that for several years. Sure. And I'd even been encouraged to, move into being an investment advisor. And I was like, no, I don't want that responsibility. That's too much. I don't want to be, quote unquote, in charge of someone's nest egg. And, I was semi happy, with what I was doing. But I met this guy one time at our church's Christmas party, and we were, he's my parents' age, and we were having the what do you do conversation. And he shared with me this idea, really this vision he had 15 years ago, in a company that he had started that focused in what he called biblically responsible investing. And like you read in the bio, that simply means that they had built mutual funds and portfolios around screening out companies that were involved in, supported, or even profited from unbiblical practices like abortion, pornography, addiction, to name a few. And that's just a really compelling idea. I had obviously money invested, clients who were invested, not many because I hadn't really moved into that much, but I had a couple mutual fund clients. And I never thought about, what went on behind the scenes, of the companies. What are we profiting from? What might we be supporting? And it was just a completely new idea for me to think about as an investor, as a shareholder of these companies. And so, that led to multiple more conversations and multiple introductions and diving into the industry. And, I felt passionate about that. And like I said, I love America. I love that we can have, diverse products and such specific products and things out there.
Yeah. Diverse conversations, right?
Yeah. And
amazing country, man.
Yeah. And so that really just, from there, that part of the process was easy. Honestly, it wasn't difficult to go to people who I knew would care about this and say, hey, have you ever thought about, what's going on behind the scenes of your investments? Showing them how they could, move their money from a secular mutual fund, ordinary mutual fund into a, biblically screened mutual fund. But from there, they still needed financial help. And so that part of the journey of getting into what Biblical Wealth Solutions is today has been a much more challenging, much more learning along the way process to get to where we are now.
Hey, so first of all, man, I want to commend you, right? Because I just feel that anyone who's willing to take a stand behind something that they believe in and value is becoming a rarity today. And in my mind, that can be, that can mean many different things, right? So I just wanted to commend you for that, because I know, it takes a certain type of person willing to stand behind something they believe in, and of course take all the persecution that's going to come along with that, right? So I just wanted to commend you for that, and just keep moving forward, man. Keep moving forward. So,
thank you.
I always have this saying, okay, and this is why I love this country. It's easy to be a critic and sit on the sidelines, right? Mm-hmm. It's easy to be a critic and sit on the sidelines, man. So I just wanted to share that with you, man, and encourage you, because I know, you're always going to run into some challenges, but the fact that you're willing to stand or take a stand against, what you believe in, and this is for everybody out there for that matter, right? I think it's great, and just to keep moving forward. So with that said, let me ask you this. I had no idea that you actually had companies out there that were screening other companies, especially publicly traded companies, right, around their practices and how they were investing their dollars, and ultimately what that finished product looked like and where it's going, and how that money is being spent and how those profits are being earned. So talk a little bit about the screening process. I find that really fascinating.
Well, I'm several steps removed from that, so that's not something that I'm doing personally, but I can speak to it. So
sure.
There are a number of companies out there now who that's their full-time business, are screening publicly traded companies. And so they look at obviously the financial records that the companies have to release. They look at, where they're making donations. Some of it's pretty obvious. Their products and services may themselves make it clear that they are, would fail the biblically responsible screening process, so to speak. Other times they're digging a little deeper into donations and things of that nature. So just basically on that end of things, they're looking for anything that wouldn't fit. They're trying to avoid the bad, so to speak.
Right.
And then they take all that data, and they also, they have to screen the companies, and then they have to compile it into the, thousands of various mutual funds that are out there. And they take all that data, and then there's mutual fund companies who focus on these types of products who, build their funds and ETFs around that data.
So what are some of the companies that come to mind, these third parties that actually do these screenings?
They're typically behind the scenes. There's one called eValuator, which is spelled a little different, eValuator. There's the Biblically Responsible Institute has their own screening process. There's a newer one on the scenes now that launched a free platform, so anyone can go to it and get access to that data. It's called Inspire Insight. And there are a number of others, but they are primarily working with the fund companies. So individuals can look them up, but they're not their typical client, so to speak.
Sure. So when people come to you, right, when they come to you for help, for financial help, how is this received typically? I mean, what are the conversations that you're typically having with your clients, around this? I'm just kind of fascinated by the fact that this is even out there. I had no idea. But what do those conversations look like?
Well, I'm pretty open on my website and in my conversations. So if people come to me, they already have some idea of biblical investing, and that's probably why they're coming to me. So used to, I was introducing the idea, one-on-one, and most people, if they were friends and family, I typically understood where they were going to stand, and so I knew that would be something that would be important to them. And that's still kind of the same today, is if people come to me because they've decided it's important to them. So from there, the conversation typically goes one of two ways. It's, I'd never thought about this. I'm certain that my, investments have some of this stuff that I wouldn't want to be invested in there. How do we move the money? What do we do from here? The other half is show me. I want to see this for myself. And so we can provide what I call a stewardship report. And so we go out to some of these companies and they'll look at their actual portfolio, give them a report of, here's all your mutual funds, here's the companies in your mutual funds, here's what we've seen is going on behind the scenes. And then it's up to them to decide, what they want to do from it. We typically are moving on pretty quickly. They're like, okay, you can help me, not be invested in stuff? Yes. Okay, great. So now what do we do from a financial standpoint? And that's typically where the conversation goes. So that initial conversation is usually pretty quick, and people have already thought through that before they're ever having a one-on-one conversation with me now.
Right. Man, fascinating, really interesting to me. So, I'm going to pivot a little bit, right? To me, this is a really interesting conversation. Now, this show, of course, as you know, is about, apartment communities and how we take average apartment communities and find and discuss strategies to converting them into amazing communities, right? So this to me was very interesting just because you're so specific about aligning your clients' dollars with causes that they feel passionately about. And so, we do the same thing essentially, right? Except our product type is that we use to drive wealth is real estate, in this case, apartment buildings. So what are some of the parallels that you see in our industry relative to what you're doing now? I know that you also look into alternative investments, right, for your clients, right? You help support them in that area. But what are some of the parallels that you see in real estate relative to some of the other product types that you're shifting your clients into?
Yeah, John, there are a number of reasons that I love and prefer the non-Wall Street or alternative investments to the stock market, even to the biblically screened mutual funds, right, so to speak. I think one time I said, the non-Wall Street investments are kind of like biblically responsible 2.0, because to me, biblical investing means two things. One is investing with a mind of stewardship. And so that is we don't want to invest in something that, goes against our values or,
right,
even more frankly, I believe that my money, that all of our things are ultimately God's. And so we're investing his money. And so I wouldn't want to invest his money into something that clearly goes against, what I see taught in his word. Sure. So that's one aspect. That's the stewardship aspect. To me, biblical investing also means investing with impact. And we can, use our dollars not only to give or in our spending, but in our investing to bless and improve the lives of others. And I think that real estate investing in particular does a fantastic job of that. So not only is it pretty simple to say, hey, we're not investing anything bad when we are, purchasing and renovating, apartment buildings, but we're taking something that was run down and restoring it and making it better. We're making, safer, cleaner, nicer, neighborhoods and communities for families to live in. And so our dollars are, not buying some secondary share on the stock market that's just traded and nobody actually gets that money. It's directly going into impacting and blessing the lives of others in a local community. And we get the profit on it. And, there are other benefits,
right,
risks that we can avoid from stock market investing. So I love it. I think it takes the idea of biblical investing and it's even a step farther.
Hey man, that's really great. I really like how you articulated that. What's really interesting is when you were talking through that, right, making the comparisons, one of the first things that popped into my mind was sponsorship. And I think that's one of the great things about real estate. It's local. You get the opportunity to really understand management, okay, the sponsorship of that community and how they're going to be improving that asset, right, that property. it took me, I'm not as young as I used to be, but I'm still young. Okay. But, when I first started off started investing, really interesting story. I was very young. I think I was maybe 21 years old or so. And my first investment was through my grandmother's stockbroker. But it was a decent amount of money. Okay. And that didn't go too great. But unfortunately I was young enough where I could, make that back, and I learned a lot from that. But one of the big lessons learned, which is why I really love real estate, is I came to the reality or to the conclusion that, unless I was a $1 billion hedge fund, right, and investing a massive amount of money into one of these public traded companies, I just would not have the same level of access to information as that type of investor would, right? Because they can put someone on the board. Very different level of access. Okay. So they're getting access to managerial information that you and I, at some point we get in the form of an annual report. Okay. And sure, we can access quarterly reports, but we all know that the information exchange is much different inside of a boardroom and with upper management than it is, okay, on an annual report, right? If we're just being completely frank. Well, one of the great things I love about real estate is it's local, right? And it's tangible. And, I don't have that barrier, right? I don't have the barrier. So in your case, the example that you gave, when you're making investment, you have the opportunity to interact with management. Okay. You have the opportunity to really understand the sponsor, right? The sponsor's values. So you can really get a lot more granular to create that alignment than you could just throwing money at something and not having that type of opportunity to interact like you can with alternatives, right? In this case, apartment community. So that was one of the first things that came to mind. So man, I really appreciate you sharing that. I find that very, very fascinating. So how is the world of COVID changing the mindset, right, of your clients? And what are they wanting to get into? What are they wanting to shy away from? So another way to ask the question is, how is COVID-19 changing the mindset of money? Mm-hmm. Okay.
I don't know yet. We will see. I hope that my clients and my future clients see the need and value of having cash, of not trying to keep emergency funds or keep cash reserves as small as possible because they may be missing out on some investment opportunity or some gain. Obviously, I'm for investing, but we have seen companies and families who had greater cash reserves have weathered this much more easily with much more peace of mind than families who, or companies who were, living paycheck to paycheck or month to month and, just didn't have those cash reserves to fall back on. So I'm pretty unusual, I suppose, as an investment advisor that I'm pretty pro keeping quite a bit of cash. Obviously, I'm pro investing as well. But we can make much wiser investments when we have security of cash on hand as well. It's important to have productive places to put that cash. We don't want it just under the mattress doing nothing necessarily, but it's certainly not a bad thing to have. And if you have a productive place for it, then I think it can be a great thing to have and make you a better investor overall. So that's what I hope my clients take away from COVID thus far.
Yeah, Jared, I really appreciate you saying that. And I do agree with you. I think it's a little bit unusual, right? I don't want to say it's unusual to be advising people to build cash, right, when you're in the business that you're in. But what I find very interesting is that I don't think it's very common, right? So I'll give you a really quick example. So, the Wall Street right now, the stock market is just on a roar, right? I mean, it's very interesting to me. But now when you look at a lot of these Fortune 50 companies, they are extremely cash heavy. They're stockpiling cash. And the reason why they do that is to afford them the ability to not only take advantage of opportunities, okay, when they come across them, meaning make investments, right, when they make sense, but also to be able to weather through challenge, right? And so as people, we're no different, right? We are no different. If we looked at a family as a functioning operation, we still need to be able to have cash on hand to be able to not only make investment decisions, but more importantly, to be able to just live, right? And be able to participate in life on a comfortable and peaceful basis. When you have cash on hand, you're not now the pressure of being the pressure associated with the pressure of decision making, I think, becomes a little clearer, right? You're not being forced into decisions because of fear. Rather, you can step back and I think make wiser decisions because you don't have that pressure behind you of feeling like you need to build cash or the lack thereof, right? So I really appreciate you saying that, and I think, I think it's great. But when your clients come to you, okay, this is just another follow-up question. When your clients come to you and they start inquiring about opportunity, especially in this market, what's the mindset like though? Is it a mindset of fear, or is it a mindset of opportunity? And then what's your role coaching them, through that?
Do you mean the real estate market? Is that what you mean?
No, I just mean just your clients in general, right? Like what's their mindset?
Okay.
So when they're coming to you in this market, is it more a mindset of fear that you're dealing with today, or is it more of a mindset of opportunity?
Okay. In today's kind of just recently post-COVID environment, or still COVID. Both, certainly both. So I've had the fearful phone calls. Back in March when the stock market dipped, I had more phone calls about, hey, would this be a good time to put more money in? Versus what should I do? Should I take money out? I had more of the opportunistic calls. So it's really both. It somewhat depends on their amount of cash reserves. That plays a role in how they're feeling about these things. Sure. And I think just personality and experience with, experience with investing, experience with things not going as planned. So, some have come from fear, and as long as they've got income coming in, we've been like, everything will be fine. Like, we'll ride this. It won't be a problem. Those who've come looking for opportunity, we've had opportunities for them. So, that's been great in a sense, for some of the families that we work with.
Awesome. So I'm gonna shift a little bit now. All right. And, one of the things that I always find really interesting is how people look at investments. Okay, and how differently sometimes people look at investments. So my question to you is, when you're considering making an investment, okay, say it's in real estate for that matter, mm-hmm. what are the top three qualities that you look for in a successful investment? Whether it be real estate, alternatives, whatever the mechanism is. How do you think through that process?
Most of my clients, non-Wall Street investing is new to them. Not all of them, but that's the majority of them. And so there's a large learning curve there. And they're not typically the do-it-yourselfers who are going out and finding their own rental properties or their own apartment buildings or something like that. They are looking for partners, looking for people where they can primarily be the passive investor and work with an expert in that area. So that expert, the operator, the sponsor, that's first, key in my mind, is what is their experience level? Is everything making sense? When I look at this and compare it to other, similar investments, does everything line up? Do I see anything that just gives me a bad gut feeling about it, so to speak? And I've learned that my gut is certainly not not perfect, but I should trust it.
Sure.
We've dodged some bullets based on my gut, and that's been good. So certainly the operator, again, their experience, what I believe to be their trustworthiness and transparency and so on. After that, I'm looking at, the business plan. What are the risks? What could cause this to not go as planned? What kinds of strategies or processes do they have in place to mitigate those risks? How likely are they? How catastrophic are they? Obviously, if we're talking about real estate, is there collateral with it that's going to help mitigate the risk? And then thirdly to that is what's the reward?
Sure.
What are we getting in exchange for taking that risk? I'm looking at regulations, regulatory things, and taxes and things of that nature as well. But I'd say those are the first three things. Operator really being a risk component as well. So operator, risk, and reward are what I'm going to evaluate before I would even begin having a conversation with a client about.
Awesome, man. That's great. That's great. So describe then your ideal real estate investment, right? I mean, I know there are going to be some parallels based on what you just talked about, but if you had to describe that, what would that look like?
Ideally would be working with an operator who has done this many times over. So obviously everybody has to start somewhere. Everyone's got to have their first deal.
Right.
But ideally they've had several of these, if not many, of these investments under their belt. I would be looking for someone who, has a team behind them so that if they get sick, get hurt, whatever, there's still a team to help keep everything going well. Where the investor is going to have collateral, access to the collateral if things don't go according to plan. And so they're going to at least be able to get all or most of their investment back. In a worst case scenario, that would be obviously ideal. I'm looking for cash flow. More so than growth. I think for most investors, cash flow is key. And if there's growth potential on top of that, which there often are in apartment investments, then that's awesome. And, getting an investment that can cash flow as well or better than the stock market and have good growth potential with it is just ideal.
Yeah, awesome. I appreciate the feedback. I think that's great feedback. So, we're in a market right now where we just have tons of money being dumped into the market, right? Government spending.
Yeah.
$3 trillion. What are your thoughts on just the economy right now and prospects of the future?
I'm no economist. I tend to be an optimist. I think that hey, we take a stand on being outspokenly Christian, right? So I might as well take a stand on politics as well. So so long as we can stay as capitalistic and free market as possible, I'm very optimistic about the long-term prospects of the economy. The big thing that I'm thinking about is at some point, someone's going to have to pay the piper. I can't fathom that we will get through this long term without increased taxes. So I'm also thinking about how can we pay our taxes today? How can we not kick the can down the road? How can we invest in things that are going to have their own built-in tax benefits
Sure.
rather than deferring them until some unknown time when who knows what taxes are going to be, as a result of this and other government spending. So that's my answer.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I really appreciate it. What I found really interesting was on a call the other day, actually listening to an economist, right? It was really kind of an interesting call. And this person that I was listening to specifically, I thought it was a good call because he wasn't given the canned answers where he's right down the middle, right? I mean, he was actually answering questions. So I really appreciated that. But some of the data that I found really interesting was that, in the United States, we have roughly 320 million people. And where our deficit is today, it's equivalent to about $50,000 per person in this country, right? And with the $3 trillion that's being injected into the economy, that'll equate to another $12 million per person, roughly, something like that, somewhere in there. But it was fascinating to me when you break the cost down on a per person basis, it makes it a lot more tangible and real, right? Because when you have a couple $1 trillion deficit sitting out in space and you keep hearing about that, the perception is that there's no impact to us, okay? Because it becomes this artificial number, right?
Yeah. Nothing's happening.
You hear it so much, it becomes this artificial number that has no impact. But when you actually convert that over into a dollar per person figure, it just becomes a little bit more real. So I found that pretty interesting, pretty fascinating. So, inflation, does inflation concern you at all, or your clients for that matter? Are you hearing any conversations about inflation or a lack thereof, especially in a market where you just have tons of money being dumped in, by the government? What are your thoughts there? And then, of course, how do you hedge against that, right?
Yeah, it certainly is reality. What the government can do things to make it worse. I don't really have any projections in terms of will it accelerate, beyond current inflation rates. But we absolutely have to consider it. We just do. If you don't consider inflation, you are going to have a problem, down the road. So,
sure.
In terms of how, you have to have your money growing at a rate beyond inflation. You have to have assets that can, you have to either reinvest your cash flow or have assets that grow, and can later turn into cash flow. So that's in terms of from an individual standpoint, that's all we can do, that I know of to help hedge against it. So while I am a fan of cash, and we also have to earn, and like I said, I'm a fan of productive cash. It's going to keep up with it or potentially even outpace it. That's yet to be seen. But we have to know its reality. We certainly can't plan on our expenses being the same in 30 years as they are today. That would be a huge, huge mistake. Sure.
No, I think that's great. It's really interesting, right? Because, when I just think about how much money is being dumped into the economy by the government, it's just a significant amount of money. And I know that precious metals have rallied, over the last couple months, likely because of that, right? Because of it's a hedge against inflation. So anytime we have tons of money going into the market, chasing fewer goods, in theory, and I too am no economist, but I've seen this happen over the course of my investing career, that, real assets tend to benefit from that. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'm no expert in gold or any of those
or real estate, right? Real estate is a real asset.
I was going to say that real estate is something that I can see a little more clearly. We could argue about the merits of precious metals. Functionally, what do they do? They have served as a currency for centuries. But we all have to live somewhere, and right. So If I'm going to put money into a hard asset, it's going to be real estate over a metal, sure. Any day. But I've never discouraged people from buying precious metals. I have warned them that hey, it's as speculative as any other market.
Of course.
And don't put all your eggs in that basket. But if you want to have some, great. I have some colleagues who feel differently, who feel pretty strongly about it. It's just honestly not an area that I've dove too deeply into.
Sure. Well, I agree with you in that case. And for me, the real assets that we, of course, purchase and invest in are predominantly, in this case, real estate, right? But I think real estate for us has proven to be a great hedge, against inflation. And so I think that opportunity long term will likely show itself again. And so, we feel pretty bullish in that area for that reason.
Yeah.
So, Jarrett, I'm going to ask you just a couple more questions. I know we're getting to the end of the show, and man, you've been a very gracious guest, especially around a topic that, man, I just find really fascinating. I had no idea that you can either make investment selections around, this criteria or any other for that matter, right? But, something that I'm really fascinated about though, especially being in this COVID market, is we hear a lot about virus and medication and vaccination and isolation and all these things, but there's very little discussion around health and the foods that we eat, right, that ultimately will either strengthen our immune system or weaken it. I mean, foods are a big, big component of that. Of course, how active our bodies are is a big component of that. My question then would be, when you talk about biblical investing, I think that's the term, right? That was aligned with investing, biblical investing. Are there categories for foods? Or kosher foods would be another.
Yeah, not from an investment standpoint or anything that I know of. I absolutely agree with you on nutrition and health being a priority.
Right.
We talked about families weathering, the economic effects of COVID based on their cash reserves. I think there, are and probably will be more, data out on individuals who weathered the COVID virus better, due to their health. And that our food has a lot to do with that. So yeah, I think it's a hugely important component. When I think of stewardship, and that's what I'm really focusing on with families,
right.
My mission with an individual family is to help them grow in, stewardship, freedom, and impact. And stewardship goes way beyond our money. And certainly it includes being good stewards of our bodies. And I'm certainly not perfect at that. But I think that is a really important aspect. If we're gonna put so much focus into building wealth, why not also put focus into living long enough to enjoy it to the degree that we can. I am not sure at all if that answers your question.
Well, it does to some degree, right? I mean, there's no perfect answer with the questions that I have. It's really just understanding what your perspective is on this, right? I mean, for me, these are conversations.
Yeah.
And the answers are not end all be all. It's really a conversation. And so I really appreciate the feedback, but I really appreciate how you approach that from the perspective of stewardship, right? Because, we live in such an amazing country where we get to, participate in various religions, right? It's just an amazing country. And still, like, my neighbor who I've known for 12 years, right? He's Jewish, amazing dude. The guy to my right, He's a Christian. We had a family that moved in, they're Muslim, just amazing people, man. Amazing people. I'm so grateful to know all of them. But what an amazing country we live in where we get to exercise our individual freedoms and rights, right? And be able to pursue the things that, we feel strongly about. Just amazing country.
Yeah.
So, when I think about what you said about stewardship, it really stands out to me because inside of stewardship, money is part of that, right?
Right.
And building legacy, right? So when you talk about, I find these conversations always fascinating, right? Because, we're not one-dimensional human beings. Okay. We're really four-dimensional human beings, right? We have bodies. So you have to keep the body healthy. Otherwise, we can't really do anything else beyond that if our bodies aren't healthy, right? Okay.
Right.
For me, it's fitness, faith, family, and then what I call franchise, which is, how to be able to produce income to be able to invest in those other three areas, right?
Yeah.
But the idea is to move all of that forward at the same time, man. Whereas, corporate culture, I don't meet a lot of people who are doing that and moving all that forward together. Usually what ends up happening in corporate America, and I can speak to this because this was me when I was, in corporate America. And of course, now inside of our companies, I'm preaching to my staff and my teams exactly what we're talking about now, right? You got to move it all forward at the same time. You have to move it all forward at the same time. Traditionally in corporate America, the conversation is, work, burn yourself out. And of course, now that creates all kinds of other issues at home, right? Divorce, just an unhealthy body because, right, there's no emphasis in the other areas. And I feel, man, that as a company, we have a responsibility now to steward our staff very differently, right? And that's why I really appreciate the word that you use, which is stewardship. But it also touches on legacy and the impact that we're going to have on people long before we're gone, right? Because we all live finite lives. And if for those of you who don't, please call me so that we can have a conversation. I want to know what your secret is. So, man, listen, I really appreciate you. You've been a tremendous guest. Very intriguing conversation, and very appreciative of you coming on and just taking a stand, man, and doing what this country stands for, which is pursuing the liberties that you have and communicating a message that you feel strongly about. So I want to thank you for that. I think it's tremendous. Now, before we leave, and I'm going to ask you to share with people how they can get a hold of you, what is the one question that you have for me that you think might add some value to our audience?
A question that I have for you. I love asking that question, and I hate getting asked that question.
Well, man,
it certainly puts you on the spot, and a lot to think of. So, a question that I should ask you,
if any.
Well, what would you say has been your biggest takeaway from our conversation?
Well, I think in my summary I answered that, but the biggest thing, the biggest thing for me really is I just am fascinated with the conversation around stewardship, right?
Okay.
Stewardship, and really what that entails. And so I can only speak from my own personal experiences.
Yeah.
And for me, stewardship is about living a 4-dimensional life, right? I mean,
yeah.
You have to take care of your body. Okay. For me, my faith is important. That's a priority. My family is huge. Okay. My wife, who I've been married to for 23 years, my kids, I have 3 daughters. To me, those are non-negotiables. Right. And then lastly is business, right? Or what I call franchise, building things that can last, creating income streams that can last for generations. Okay. The other side of that too is when we do that, now we can serve and help other people through those income streams. But you still have to be able to finance. Okay. I still have to be able to finance the needs of my family. Right. And then also the contributions that we make into the marketplace. And you can't do that unless you have a profitable stream of reoccurring income. So I really appreciate the conversation, man, about stewardship, because I think it's a big one. I think it's one that is still a little bit behind in terms of corporate America. When I say corporate America, I'm talking, Fortune 2000 companies, Fortune 1000 companies. But I believe that there's going to be a shift that takes place there, because the reality is you can't lead what you're not being, right?
Right.
You just can't. Yeah. You can't lead what you're not being, man. And so, inside of our companies, those are conversations that we have weekly. It's really important, right? I mean, we go as far as giving people a journal, and every time we have our weekly meetings, we share one thing in that area that is advancing your life forward. So it's a big deal for us, and I appreciate, your perspective on that, and, let's move it all forward, man, at the same time.
It's a challenge, man. That's a challenge for me for sure. But you're right. It has to be done. You can't neglect any of those areas.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, if it were easy, I mean, we likely wouldn't be on Earth, right? That's just not. Yeah. So the fact that it's a challenge is why, we need to have more of these conversations and commit to it. A perfect example is this market that we're in right now. To me, it's mind-boggling that we're having so many conversations around vaccination and isolation and all these other things, except the underlying issue, which is our health. It's just the craziest thing I've ever seen. Crazy to me, right? It's like, look, folks, at the end of the day, what this comes down to, and look, I'm really empathetic to just the fact that this is impacting all of us, okay, in many different ways, okay? Very empathetic to that. And I've seen the devastation with some of my partners, losing family members, right? Mm-hmm. But even the conversations that they share with me, it's like, hey, John, we have to start making a change really to our health. That's where it starts. And I'm just blown away that conversation is not happening in this market, more of that, right? Around the foods that we eat. And just, getting our bodies healthier, just just mind-blowing to me, really. So you asked the question. That was a long-winded answer, but I answered it.
Awesome.
Well, hey, Jared, so how do people get a hold of you? But if they want to learn a little bit more about who you are, what you do, they have more questions around, your message and what you're sharing out there with, the various communities that you're involved in, what would be the best way that they get a hold of you?
Yeah, the best way to learn more would be to listen to my podcast called the Biblical Wealth Podcast. So you'll get to hear me talk a lot and interview some pretty awesome guests on there as well. So that'd be the first place. You can also learn more at biblicalwealthsolutions.com. So trying to make it pretty easy to find me there. I'm in the process of releasing an ebook here shortly that will really paint the big picture of a lot of what we discussed today. So it's not there today. It will be there soon. So likely when you're listening to this in the future, that'll be available at biblicalwealthsolutions.com. So those are the best ways to get in touch with me. We got a whole team of people, so we can get you connected to the right person to help with, whatever financial need there is.
Okay, awesome. But so I'm going to just summarize really quickly. So inside of this space of stewardship, right, we can approach it from a couple different viewpoints, but ultimately we are not one-dimensional human beings, right?
Right.
We're four-dimensional human beings. And what you're doing is you're giving everyone an opportunity to be able to recognize that, okay, and align their values with their dollars, okay, yeah. Especially when it comes to generating, a return on their investment. So I want to thank you, for being here. Great conversation, and an unusual conversation, which is why I find it so fascinating, especially considering the time that we're in, right? So, thank you for being here. So folks, I really appreciate you joining this conversation. I am John Brackett, your host. Remember, inside of this space of stewardship, for us, our purpose is to build out great apartment communities and to improve how people live. So please share, like us, go to our podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, Spotify. You can also link in with me on LinkedIn and connect there. Instagram is a great place. Look up We Build Great Apartment Communities on Instagram. Go to John Brackett on LinkedIn if you want to engage in a conversation with me. You can also go to our YouTube channel, which is We Build Great Apartment Communities. And I look forward to speaking with everybody, and you guys have a great one. Jarrett Williams, thank you so much for being on the show, and I wish you continued success, bud.
Thanks, John. Great conversation.
You're welcome, man. Clarity of purpose creates our greatest competitive advantage. When we transform apartment buildings to thriving communities, we improve how people live and create assets with high profit margins. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this up with a friend. I'm John Brackett, bringing you things you can implement right away.